Well, good afternoon, everyone. I will read another story from James Herriot. I'm always sad when I read these stories that I can't do it with a Scottish accent, some cool accent of some kind. Every once in a while, I make a pitiful attempt at some kind of an accent, and I know it's ridiculous, but bear with me if I do that, all right? Accents are fascinating, and the only one I'm stuck with is a PA accent, which no one finds attractive. Some accents are so cool, but the PA accent just isn't. And everybody laughs at it. Maybe I'll perfect the Davis County one while I live here. One of the things about the PA accent, a neighboring county, Lebanon County, is even versed with the accents. They say they're V's for W's and Ch's are like that. And there's a story that there was a couple in Lebanon County that had a little girl, and they said later that we were going to name her Janet, but we have so much trouble with our Ch's that we named her Violet instead. So, all right. What a beautiful boy. My stint in London was nearing its end. Our breaking-in weeks were nearly over, and we waited for news of postings to initial training wing. The air was thick with rumours. We were going to Aberystwyth in Wales, too far away for me. I wanted the north. Then we were going to Newquay in Cornwall, worse still. I was aware that the impending birth of AC2 Herriot's child did not influence the general war strategy, but I still wanted to be as near to Helen as possible at the time. The whole London phase has blurred my memory, possibly because everything was so new and different that the impression could not be fully absorbed, and also perhaps because I was tired most of the time. I think we were all tired. Few of us were used to being jerked from slumber at 6 a.m. every morning and spending the day in continual physical activity. If we weren't being drilled, we were being marched to meals, to classes, to talks. I had lived in a motor car for a few years, and the rediscovery of my legs was painful. There were times, too, when I wondered what it was all about. Like all the other young men, I had imagined that after a few brisk preliminaries, I would be sitting in an airplane, learning to fly. But it turned out that this was so far in the future that it was hardly even mentioned. At the ITW, we would spend months learning navigation, principles of flight, Morse code, and many other things. I was thankful for one blessing. I had passed the mathematics exam. I had always counted on my fingers, and still do. And I had been so nervous about this that when I went to class with the ATC in Derby, before my call-up, dredging from my school days, horrific calculations about trains passing each other at different speeds and water running in and out of bathtubs, but I managed to scrape to get through and felt ready to face anything. There were some unexpected shocks in London. I didn't anticipate spending days mucking out some of the dirtiest piggeries I have ever seen. Somebody must have had the idea of converting all the RAF waste food into pork and bacon, and of course there was plenty of labor at hand. I had a strong feeling of unreality as with other aspiring pilots I threw muck and swill around hour after hour. There was another time that I had the same feeling. One night, 3 of us decided to go to the movies. We took pains to get to the front of the line for the evening meal so that we could be in time for the start of the picture. When the doors of the dining room of the zoo were thrown open, we were the first in, but a sergeant cook met us in the entrance with, "I want 3 volunteers for dishwashing. You, and you." And he marched us away. He probably had a kind heart because he patted our shoulders as we climbed miserably into greasy dungarees. "Never mind, lads," he said, "I'll see you get a good meal afterwards." My friends were taken somewhere else, and I found myself alone in a kind of dungeon at the end of a metal chute. Very soon, dirty plates began to cascade down the chute, and my job was to knock the food remains off of them and transfer them to a mechanical washer. The menu that night was cottage pie and chips, a combination which has remained engraved in my memory. For more than 2 hours, I stood at bay while a non-stop torrent of crockery poured down on me. thousands and thousands of plates, every one bearing a smear of cottage pie and a blob of cold gravy and a few adhering chips. As I reeled around in the meaty steam, a little tune tinkled repetitively into my mind. It was the song that Siegfried and I were forever singing as we waited to enter the Royal Air Force. The popular jingle which in our innocence we thought typified the new life ahead of us. If only I had wings, oh what a difference it would make to things. All day long I'd be up the sky, up on high, talking to the birdies that passed me by. But in this reeking cavern, with my hands, face, hair, and every pore of my skin impregnated with cottage pie and chips, those birdies seemed far away. At last, however, the plates began to slow down and finally stopped coming. The sergeant came in beaming and congratulated me on doing a fine job. He led me back to the dining hall, vast and empty save for my two friends. They both wore bemused, slightly stunned expressions, and I'm pretty sure I looked the same. "Sit down here, lads," the sergeant said. We took our places side by side in the corner with the bare boards of the table stretching away in the distance. "I told you you'd get a real good meal, didn't I? Well, here it is." And he slid 3 heaped platesfuls in front of us. "There you are," he said. "Cottage pie, chips, double helping." The following day I might have felt more disenchanted than ever, but news of the postings blotted out all other feelings. It seemed too good to be true. I was going to Scarborough. I had been there, and I knew it was a beautiful seaside resort, but that wasn't why I was so delighted. It was because it was in Yorkshire. I suppose once you embark on a life of crime, it gets easier all the time. Making a start is the only hard bit. Sorry, I missed a page. At any rate, this is how it seemed to me as I sat in the bus playing hooky again. There had been absolutely no trouble about dodging out of the Grand. The streets of Scarborough had been empty of military police, and nobody had given me a second look as I strolled casually into the bus station. It was Saturday, the 13th of February. Helen was expecting our baby this weekend, and it could happen any time, and I just didn't see how I could sit here those few miles away and do nothing. I had no classes today or tomorrow, so I would miss nothing, and nobody would miss me. It was, I told myself, a mere technical offense, and anyway, I had no option. Like the first time, I just had to see Helen. And it wouldn't be long now, I thought, as I hurried up the familiar doorway of her home. I went inside and gazed disappointedly at the empty kitchen. Somehow, I had been sure she would be standing there waiting for me, her arms wide. I shouted her name, but nothing stirred in the house. I was still there listening when her father came through from the inner room. "You've got a son," he said. I put my hands on the back of a chair. "What? You've got a son." He was so calm. "When?" "A few minutes ago. Nurse Brown's just been on the phone. Funny you should walk in now." I leaned on the chair and he gave me a keen look. Would you like a drop of whiskey?" "Whiskey? No. Why?" "Well, you've gone a bit white, lad, that's all. Anyway, you'd better have something to eat." No, thanks. I've got to get out there." He smiled. "There's no hurry, lad. Anyway, they won't want anybody there too soon. You better eat something." "Sorry, I couldn't. Would you mind if I borrowed your car?" I was still trembling a little as I drove away. If only Mr. Alderson had led up to it gradually. He might have said, "I've got some news for you," or something like that. But his direct approach had shattered me. When I pulled up outside Nurse Brown's, it still hadn't got through to me that I was a father. Greenside Nursing Home sounded impressive, but it was in fact Nurse Brown's dwelling house. She was a state registered and usually had 2 or 3 of the local women in at a time to have their babies. She opened the door herself and threw up her hands. "Mr. Herriot, it hasn't taken you long. Where did you spring from?" She was a cheerfully dynamic little woman with mischievous eyes. I smiled sheepishly. "Well, I happened to just drop in on Mr. Alderson and got the news." "Well, you might have given us time to get the little fellow properly washed," she said. "But never mind. Come on up. He's fine baby, 9 pounds. Still in a dreamlike state, I followed her up the stairs of the little house and into a small bedroom. Helen was there in the bed looking flushed. "Hello," she said. I went over and kissed her. What was it like? I inquired nervously. Awful, Helen replied without enthusiasm. Then she nodded toward the cot beside her. I took my first look at my son. Little Jimmy was brick red in color. His face had a bloated, dissipated look. As I hung over him, he twisted his tiny fists under his chin and appeared to be undergoing some mighty internal struggle. His face was swelled and darkened as he contorted his features, and then from deep among the puffy flesh, his eyes fixed me with a baleful glare, and he stuck his tongue out of the corner of his mouth. "My word!" I exclaimed. The nurse looked at me startled. "What's the matter?" "Well, he's a funny-looking little thing, isn't he?" "What?" She stared at me furiously. "Mr. Herriot, how can you say such a thing? He's a beautiful baby." I peered into the cot again. Jimmy greeted me with a lopsided leer, turned purple, and blew some bubbles. Are you sure he's all right?" I said. There was a tired giggle from the bed, but Nurse Brown was not amused. "All right? What exactly do you mean?" She drew herself up stiffly. I shuffled my feet. "Well, is there anything wrong with him?" I thought she was going to hit me. "Anything? How dare you? Whatever are you talking about?" "I have never heard such nonsense." She turned appealingly toward the bed, but Helen, a weary smile on her face, had closed her eyes. I drew the enraged little woman to one side. "Look, nurse, have you by chance got any others on the premises?" "Any other what?" she asked icily. "Babies, new babies. I want to compare Jimmy with another one." Her eyes widened. "Compare him, Mr. Herriot. I am not going to listen to you any longer. I have lost my patience with you. I am asking, nurse." I repeated, "Have you any more here?" There was a long pause, and she looked at me as though I was something new and incredible. "Well, there's Mrs. Dewburn in the next room. Little Sidney was born about the same time as Jimmy." Can I have a look at him?" I gazed at her appealingly. She hesitated, then a pitying smile crept over her face. "Oh, you, just a minute then." She went into the other room, and I heard a mumble of voices. She reappeared and beckoned to me. Mrs. Dewburn was the butcher's wife, and I knew her well. The face on the pillow was hot and tired like Helen's. Mr. Herriot, I didn't expect to see you. I thought you were in the army." "The Air Force, actually, Mrs. Dewburn. I'm on leave at the moment." I looked in the cot. Sidney was dark red and bloated too, and he also seemed to be wrestling within himself. The inner battle showed in a series of grotesque facial contortions, culminating in a toothless snarl. I stepped back involuntarily. "Oh, what a beautiful child," I said. "Yes, isn't he lovely?" said his mother fondly. "He is indeed gorgeous." I took another disbelieving glance into the cot. "Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Dewburn. It was kind of you to let me see him." "Ah, not at all, Mr. Herriot. It's nice of you to take an interest." Outside the door, I took a long breath and wiped my brow. The relief was tremendous. Sidney was even funnier looking than Jimmy. When I returned to Helen's room, Nurse Brown was sitting on the bed, and the two women were clearly laughing at me. And of course, looking back, I must have appeared silly. Sidney Dewburn and my son are now two big, strong, remarkably good-looking young men. So my fears were groundless. The little nurse looked at me quizzically. I think she had forgiven me. I suppose you think that all calves and foals are beautiful right from the moment they are born." "Well, yes," I replied. "I have to admit it. I think they are." As I have said before, ideas do not come readily to me, but on the bus journey back to Scarborough, a devilish scheme began to hatch in my brain. I was due for compassionate leave, but why should I take it now? Helen would be in the nursing home for a fortnight, and there didn't seem any sense in mooning around Derby on my own. The thing to do would be to send myself a telegram a fortnight from now, announcing the birth, and we would be able to spend my leave together. It was interesting how my moral scruples dissolved in the face of this attraction. But anyway, I told myself where was the harm? I wasn't scrounging anything extra. I was just altering the time. The Air Force or the war effort in general would suffer no mortal blow. Long before the darkened vehicle had rolled into town, I'd made up my mind, and the following day I wrote to a friend in Derby and arranged the telegram. But I wasn't such a hardened criminal as I thought, because as the days passed, doubts began to creep in. The rules at ITW were rigidly strict. I would be in trouble if I was found out, but the prospect of a holiday with Helen blotted out other considerations. When the fateful day arrived, my roommates and I were stretched on the bed after lunch when a great voice boomed along the corridor. AC2 Herriot! Come on, let's have you, Herriot! My stomach lurched. Somehow I hadn't reckoned on Flight Sergeant Blackett coming into this. I had thought maybe an LAC or a corporal, even one of the sergeants, might have handled it, not the great man himself. Flight Sergeant Brackett was an unsmiling martinet of immense natural presence, with a gaunt 6-foot 2-inch frame, wide bony shoulders, and a craggy countenance that did nothing to diminish. It was usually the junior NCO who dealt with our misdemeanors, but if Flight Sergeant Brackett ever took a hand, it was a withering experience. I heard it again, the same bull bellow which echoed over our heads on the square every morning. Herriot! Let's be having you, Herriot! I was on my way at a brisk trot out of the room and along the polished surface of the corridor. I came to a halt stiffly in front of the tall figure. Yes, Flight Sergeant. You, Herriot. You, Herriot? Yes, Flight Sergeant. The telegram between his fingers scuffed softly against the blue serge of his trousers as he swung his head to and fro. My pulse rate accelerated painfully as I waited. Well now, lad, I am pleased to tell you that your wife has had her baby safely. He raised the telegram to his eyes. It says here, a boy, both well. Nurse Brown. Let me be the first to congratulate you. He held out his hand, and I took it and he smiled. Suddenly he looked very much like Gary Cooper. Now you'll want to go off right away and see them both, eh? I nodded dumbly. He must have thought I was an unemotional character. He put a hand on my shoulders and guided me to the orderly room. Come on, let's get a moving. The organ tones rolled over the heads of the airmen seated at the table. This is important. Got a brand new father here. Leave pass, railway warrant, pay, double quick. Right, Flight. Very good, Flight. The typewriters began to tap. The big man went over to a railway timetable on the wall. You haven't far to go anyway. Let's see here. Derby. Yes, there's a train out here for York at 3:20. He looked at his watch. You ought to make it if you get your skates on. A deepening sense of shame threatened to engulf me when he spoke again. Double back to your room and get packed. We'll have your documents ready. I changed into my best blues, filled my knit kit bag, and threw it over my shoulder, then hurried back to the orderly room. The flight sergeant was waiting. He handed me a long envelope. It's all there, son, and you've got plenty of time. He looked me up and down, walked around me, and straightened the white flash of my cap. Yes, very smart. We've got to have you looking right for your missus, haven't we? Gave me that Gary Cooper smile again. He was a handsome, kind-eyed man, and I had never noticed that. He strolled with me along the corridor. This is your first one, of course. Yes, Flight. He nodded. Well, it's a great day for you. I've got 3 of them myself. Getting big now. But I miss them like everything. With this ruddy war, I really envy you walking into that door tonight and seeing your son for the very first time. Guilt drove through me like a searing flood as we halted at the top of the stairs. I was convinced my shifty eyes and furtive glance would betray me, but he wasn't really looking at me. You know, lad, he said softly, gazing somewhere above my head, this is the best time of your life coming up. We weren't allowed to use the main stairways, and as I clattered down the narrow stone service stairs, I heard the big voice again. Give my regards to 'em both. I had a wonderful time with Helen, walking for miles, discovering the delights of pram pushing with little Jimmy miraculously improved in appearance. Everything was so much better than if I'd taken my leave at the official time, and there is no doubt my plan was a success. But I was unable to gloat about it. The triumph was dimmed, and to this day I have reservation about the whole thing. Flight Sergeant Blackett spoiled it all for me.